Mm, 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 mm. Some people would say, my. I'm simply going to say good afternoon and welcome to the Second Chance radio broadcast coming to you from the campus of Oakwood University right here in the beautiful city of Huntsville, Alabama, that now has the designation of being the largest city in the state of Alabama, according to our most recent census. And the sound that you're hearing this afternoon is the sound of one of my favorite albums of all time. That's Marvin Gaye's What's Going On. That's the instrumental version. And it is the name of the segment that we have every first and third Sunday of the month. What's Going On is a social and political roundtable discussion with some of the best and brightest minds that I know. They also happen to be good friends of mine, and I'm always delighted to be able to share this platform with them at this time. I'm especially excited today because this day represents the start of my 31st year on this broadcast. That's right. It was 31 years ago today, or this weekend, that we started Second Chance, and we're still going strong so many years later. I'm very happy about that, and happy that this particular segment has been a part of the stable of offerings that we have from week to week that enrich, enlighten, and inspire people who tune in. And I simply want to say to those that are listening this afternoon, thank you for being a part of our day. Thank you for being part of the broadcast. If you're listening on 90.1 FM this afternoon, or perhaps if you're watching on 90.1 FM, which is Praise 90.1 FM on Facebook, I want to simply say thank you for being a part of our telecast, our radio broadcast, and our conversation on this afternoon. I also hope that the time, if you are in Central Standard Time, is a little bit after 2 o'clock, because if you have a little bit after 3 o'clock, you are way off right now, because we have fallen back in our annual tradition of falling back on the first weekend of November. Now, there's a little confusion here in the state of Alabama because just last year, the governor signed into law an end to what we know as this fallback experience, meaning that we would have perpetual daylight savings time. But there's a little piece of business that Congress must take care of first. That's right. Congress has not approved the change yet. So therefore, we are still falling back. Perhaps one day we won't. But in the meantime, and until Congress finds its way in life, we're stuck with falling back on that first weekend of the month. I've got some people introduced to you at this time. David Person is joining me this afternoon. What's up, my man?
Because I'm confused with this whole fall back, spring forward thing. So I'm on time.
And hey, I'm glad that you are on time, because that's a good thing. And we're happy to have you here this afternoon. I was a little confused too, because in fact, last weekend I was celebrating the fact that we would not be falling back because of what the governor said. And then Cy and I saw this news report that was celebrating the fact that we were falling back. So I immediately went to my good friend Google and found out what was going on. And Google enlightened me about the situation. And I learned that we would not be falling back. So, hey, there we go.
All right.
Preston Foster joins us this afternoon, my homeboy from New York. Of course, there's nothing to talk about in baseball today except for the uniform that I'm wearing, which says Braves. And of course, the great Hank Aaron, number 44. A lot of people know I'm the biggest Yankees fan in the world, but hey, I got a fallback team. That's the Braves, because they're only a couple of miles up the road. And of course, Preston spent lots of years in the city of Atlanta. Welcome to the platform, my brother.
Kenny, it's good to be here always. It's good to be here with you and David and the rest of the brothers, including my brother. I'm a little conflicted about the Braves because I did live in Atlanta 11 years, but that tomahawk chop thing is still bothering me, especially the kind of ignoring of the issue, so to speak. And to me, it's still being encouraged by management. So I'm happy the Braves won. I think they have a great team. But the tomahawk chop, along with abandoning downtown Atlanta, has me a little sideways with the Braves themselves.
I'm with you, man. The chop has to go. And I even posted that during the series. Tweeted it or something, because it is extremely offensive, and that's perhaps another conversation for another day. But the chop has got to go. Stephen Foster's with us this afternoon. Another one of my homies. What's going on, Stephen Foster? I think he's making his way in. So while he's making his way in, let me say what's up to Dr. Keith Burton. What's going on, Dr. Keith Burton? Always good. I see you smiling, so I know you're in the house, man. What's going on, bro?
I say, assalamu alaikum. I'm just smiling right now because I wonder if Stephen's trying to get in through dial-up. But those old days of CompuServe.
So I was laughing too.
Yeah, we've got some interesting technological things happening in this moment, and I'm hoping that they'll straighten out along the way. But we are absolutely right here and ready to roll. There are no challenges on the radio side, so you guys are hearing it exactly like you need to hear it. And on the Facebook side, we've got a couple of things going on. But again, if you see us out there this afternoon, and I think you do, we're happy that you have joined us on this afternoon. I'm going to bring him in right now. I was going to bring him in a little bit later, but since he's here, I want to go ahead and honor him and respect the fact that anytime I call on him to join us, to be a part of this experience here, Second Chance, he's so willing to do it. He's none other than Derrick Green. He's not a stranger to this broadcast. Welcome to the broadcast, Derrick.
Kenny, it's great to be on this show with you and all the brothers here. In particular, I want to say to Preston as well, to Dave as well. Just great to be on here with you. And Kenny, listen, 31 years. God bless you, man. You've been doing it a long time, and I know the impact you've had on my life and so many other people as well.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate that, man. And David Person, of course, who's with me today, remembers that because he was the general manager here at the time and initiated a conversation about perhaps developing a radio show. I was a mental health professional at the time and was trying to do my best to support the quality of life of others. And we just had a series of conversations about how we might bring that to the radio space. And so thank you again, David, for that opportunity.
Yeah, man, it was a pleasure and a blessing, and you've left quite a legacy. That's back when Derrick was just a young brother running around the Oakwood campus instead of a big baller hanging out with the governor of New Jersey, the recently re-elected governor of New Jersey.
Hey, well, look, let's start right there because the election this past week, of course, stirred up a lot of conversation about a lot of things. And that's really why I asked Derrick to join us this afternoon, because Derrick is right square in the center of the work that's being done in the governor's office. Derrick has been on our show before, in fact, to expound on the work that he's doing in the public space. And of course, I know that you were looking at that race intently. On the other side of the race and the victory for Governor Phil Murphy and the re-election, just give me your reflections and thoughts about the lead up to that race. And then just on the other side, once victory was achieved, what are your thoughts? What are your reflections? What are your insights about where you are and where the governor is at this time?
Well, first of all, it has been an honor for me to work for Governor Murphy. And when I went to Oakwood, of course, enter to learn was something that is a part of my DNA. So when I took a career in public service, some 27 years ago, I began to do campaigns, and this one was probably one of the most rewarding campaign in the country. When he ran in 2017, in 2015, and I told him then that if you, as a senior advisor, I told him that if you invest in the Black community, as far as policy, good, sound policy, time, they will be loyal to you if you're loyal to them. And then he asked me to join the administration. When we won in 2017, I came in, I moved my family back, kicking and screaming, back to New Jersey. And then we embarked upon some of the most progressive laws to reverse many of the issues that have been along in New Jersey since slavery that have not been addressed. And we've begun to do that. And then of course, the governor announced re-election, and the pollster said that we were 11 or 12 points up going to the election. A week out, Preston, a week out, they told us that all that, number one, because I had enough experience to know that New Jersey is a centrist state. And there's not been a Democrat governor elected to a second term since 1977. That's 44 years. Brendan Byrne was the governor at the time. And I knew that some of the national trends and some of the state trends that happened, that New Jersey was going to move to the center. But we prepared for that. And we prepared for that because we kept the progressive coalition led by Black people together. And that night, when the numbers came in, and all of you all saw it, we were down almost 80,000 votes until the Black and brown neighborhoods started reporting in. And in one, I'll tell you, when Essex County came in, or some of Essex came in, that number went from about 80,000 down to 19,000 down. And I said to my team in the office, I said, Governor Murphy's going to get a second term, because I knew that the communities were, the Black and brown ones, were going to reward him, and the progressive communities were going to reward him for being a progressive governor.
All right. Derrick, I will let you know that there's something going on with your audio, so I'm not sure if you want to log off and log back on again. Maybe that will help, or maybe even a relocation that might help, or reboot that might help. But there's some pixelation in that process, and I know you're saying such great things and such important things. Stephen Foster has joined us at this time. What's up, Stephen?
All right. Happy first Sunday, brothers.
It's good to see you as well. Preston, let me come back to you for a minute on this race in New Jersey. And of course, I want to talk a little bit about the race in Virginia as well, where Terry McAuliffe lost his bid to become governor again in the state of Virginia. Talk to me a little bit about the climate right now as it relates to the Democrats as we move towards the 2022 midterm elections and then subsequently the 2024 presidential race. What have we learned in this moment about where the Democrats are?
Well, the Democrats, in my view, to quote Donald Trump, are kind of low energy right now. You recall Donald Trump called Jeb Bush low energy, and it was pretty accurate. And I think in the run-up to this election, starting in about July, from the time that the centrist coalition in the Senate came up with the at least the interim compromise that would allow the infrastructure bill that just passed to pass with bipartisan votes. From that time until just Friday, or actually yesterday, we've been in a spin cycle with these two infrastructure bills, the primary infrastructure bill and the reconciliation bill. And the inability of the Democratic Party, specifically the Senate, to come up with a package that could be passed made the Democrats look incompetent, disorganized, and kind of slowed the momentum that Joe Biden started with. And so that made I think both candidates, both Governor Murphy and the contest in Virginia, I think it slowed some of the momentum and de-energized some of the base. That being said, I think what also happened is that white women, white mothers moved toward the Republican Party, in particular in Virginia. And I think that was based on local issues. The local issues are race and, is education, not race. But education could be parsed as education / race, because race was injected with the critical race theory, quote unquote, issue being leveraged by the Republican Party. And as we've talked about probably over 24 times on this show, the void of messaging within the Democratic Party that allows critical race theory and defund the police and other issues, and I say again, issues in quotes, to dominate the discussion.
We may not like, and when I say we, those of us who are either Democratic leaning or independent Democrats or independents who are Democratic leaning, we may not like some of the outcomes of these experiences. And I'm noting particularly the race in Virginia, noting the previous presidential campaign where Donald Trump won. But you have to give Governor-elect Youngkin and even Trump credit for this. They're running smart campaigns because they're speaking to people. And they're speaking to people in ways that are energizing those people and causing them to come out. As you noted, Preston, when you talked about the mass mandates, when you talked about the critical race theory in education and wokeism, as a lot of people are talking about right now, when you're talking about the whole notion of this issue of the teaching of race and Youngkin's comments about even Toni Morrison and literature, et cetera, et cetera. He's speaking to people in ways that are causing them to galvanize around something that's creating a lot of energy. At the same time, the Democrats appear impotent in terms of their response to these matters. Dave, I wonder what your thoughts are and what your general conclusions are about what we have seen in this particular season, and what do the Democrats need to do as they desperately attempt to hold on to what they gained 2 years ago during the midterms and defeat Donald Trump as the next president of the United States in the 2024 campaign.
Kenny, I think it's very easy to underestimate the magnitude of the challenge that faces the Democratic Party because its base is Black people, even more in a more concentrated fashion, Black women. And that base has, while we're not homogenous, we're not a monolith, at the same time, there is a general, I think, cultural and political perception that we have as it relates to the issues that face our community and our relationship to this nation. So the Democratic Party faces a challenge in that general perception, politically, culturally, socially, that tends to define the Black community is out of sync dramatically with where a lot of white and rural Americans are. So that's a tremendous challenge. The Democratic Party has to perform almost a magical feat, and that is to figure out how to retain its base, cultivate its base, expand its base, while simultaneously retaining to whatever degree is possible as many, progressive, independent-minded whites and others as it can. It's not an easy feat. It really requires, I think, some very targeted messaging, some very strategic messaging. And honestly, we're not there yet. And I'm hoping that will change under Chairman Harrison, Jamie Harrison. And I'm hoping that we'll see a change in states like Alabama. In fact, I'm going to say that I think Alabama in particular, and this is my final point, is an excellent state to work these issues out because the challenge is significant here. And if we can figure out how to do it here, and we're working on it, but if we can figure out how to do that successfully here, it could provide a blueprint for Democrats across the nation.
Dr. Burton, go ahead.
If I could, and Dave is spot on. If I could give you, first of all, can you all hear me more clearly?
Yes.
Thank you. If I could give some sort of guidance on how we did it, because we experienced that Republican, what I call white backlash in New Jersey. And that's one of the reasons why the race was so tight. We were able, number one, the Republicans do a great job at the what I learned from Oakwood, which was the Southern strategy, which was that Nixon developed, which was talking in code to white voters, and they've done that very successfully, and they did it here in New Jersey. So they talk about taxes. And when you talk about taxes, you're really talking about not providing resources for urban areas. When you talk about crime, you're talking about Black and brown neighborhoods in our cities. So it's an us versus them out the right at the front, and they do it in code, and that's what Chitterelli did. Chitterelli had a crime and taxes and values piece. And one of the values pieces that he ran on was the critical race theory. So the Nixon Southern strategy, Kenny, was alive and well in New Jersey. Now, how do you fight that? Dave's point about Alabama. Well, you fight it by finding common ground and organizing. The thing that the Democratic Party doesn't do well is that they don't organize in between elections. So you have to organize, and that's what we were able to do. We were able to organize constituency groups. We were able to organize women, particularly Black women. We were able to organize the faith community. We were able to organize the LGBTQ community. We were able to organize the Latino community. And we all came together and formed a progressive army that really has no color, but what it has is issues that mean something to people's everyday lives. And because of that, at the end, they rewarded Phil Murphy because of the way we organized.
That's great too. Great perspective and great insight there from being on the ground there in New Jersey, because it was touch and go there for about 24 hours. It didn't really kind of know which way it was going to swing, but of course, you may have had a better sense of that because of the work that you had already put in on the front end, which is significant, of course. Dr. Burton, as you look at this landscape currently in our nation, as David alluded to, and also Derrick suggested about messaging and organizing, and the fact that those are two flaws right now as it relates to the Democratic Party. The messaging, in fact, on this infrastructure bill has been horrific, meaning that people have focused more on the infighting than what the outcome of passing the legislation would be. So while people are watching this fight, they're kind of saying, oh my gosh, what's going on? You know, the Democrats don't have their house in order. And, I'm less interested in the procedural stuff than I am about getting that child credit tax than I am in terms of getting Medicaid expanded. I want to know, what have you done for me lately, Democrats? And so from the context of messaging, Dr. Burton, elaborate for us and give us some insight as to the road forward.
Okay, there's a term in rhetoric we use called stasis, saying what is the real issue? And I think Derrick hit at it when he looked at this being a continuation of this Southern strategy. In fact, Professor Angie Maxwell from the University of Arkansas, she actually tweeted that this week, that what we're seeing is basically a continuation of the successful implementation of the Southern strategy. So what is the Southern strategy? Southern strategy, we know that after the progress that was made with the civil rights movement, and of course, we see the change of the Democrats in their ideology, because remember, the Democrats at one time was the party of the Klan, and so we see this change sort of thing. And so the whole idea is, okay, we need to find a way to find a house for those who want to maintain the racist status quo of the nation. And so we're looking at this in terms of party, but it's really about people. Okay, where are racists finding a home? And so if we look at it as an issue of racism, where people are voting against their own interest, then the strategy needs to be one in which we're finding ways to address issues of race directly, particularly among those people who continue to vote against their own interest. And I know a lot of work has been done on this. On this show, I've mentioned Arlie Hoskill's Strangers in Their Own Land, Angry Morning on the American Right, trying to analyze why so many people think in these ways and continue to vote against their own interests when they align themselves with Republicans. And so how do we deliver a message similar to that which Lyndon B. Johnson delivered in his speech at that graduation in Howard University, that famous speech where he basically, speaks about the way in which whites have bought in to this whole concept of whiteness, where they're thinking, okay, we may not have the wealth like those in the top categories, but at least we're not black, sort of thing. How do we address that issue? Because I think that's what the real issue is. And also, there's been a successful sort of painting of the Democratic Party as the party of the minorities, when we know that there is still a white majority in this nation. And so how do we sort of get the Rainbow Coalition message out? We know that the most powerful people in the Democratic Party are indeed white. And so how do we message in a way that the Democrats can position themselves as the party of America's future, rather than the party of those who are a threat to America's future? And so I think that's some of the things that we're really trying to wrestle with right now, because if it's a party issue, it's basically about, okay, how can we get people to vote for our team? But what is the real issue? And this is a race issue. How can we address the issue of race in a way where those who align themselves to the Republican Party simply because of their whiteness can understand that they're voting against their own interests?
Preston, I'll come back to you in just a moment, but we do need to take a short break just to let people know who we are. We are Second Chance. It is the What's Going On segment that takes place every first and third Sunday of the month, and we're having a conversation about social and political issues. We're going to return in just a moment with more from the fellas on this beautiful Sunday afternoon that I hope you have remembered to fall back on. I'll be back in just a moment. Kenny Anderson, Second Chance. Hope you're having a great day. Welcome back to the broadcast. I'm Kenny Anderson at Second Chance, talking this afternoon on what's going on with David Preston Foster, Dr. Keith Burton, and Derrick Green joining us this afternoon. Stephen Foster is somewhere in the area, but we're trying to get him reconnected at this time, and hopefully we will before the show is over. Of course, we have an opportunity each first and third Sunday to share information and perspective on a variety of things. Just before the break, Preston, you were trying to get in here to share something.
Yeah, I've just got one other quick point to add about Democratic strategy. And it's something that I think allows Democrats to talk about what they believe in that goes around the issue of race. And that is embracing libertarianism. The Democratic Party, at least on the abortion issues, supposedly the pro-choice party. But on issues like vaccine mandates, and I'm not talking about public health here, I'm talking about politics. You have people who are about to lose their jobs because of vaccine mandates. And mandates, say one day, God willing, COVID will end. And when COVID ends, you know the American people have a short memory, and they won't remember the efficacy of vaccines. They won't remember who came up with the vaccine. All they'll remember is that COVID is over and I lost my job because of the vaccine mandates. And it's a little difficult for the Democratic Party to embrace mandates while being pro-choice. And so I think that they have to embrace libertarianism generically because there are things that they want to do. They want to decriminalize marijuana, which is something that would positively affect the Black community in terms of mitigating mass incarceration. So the Democratic Party needs to position itself as the party of choice, and they're being positioned as the kind of the nanny party that stops choice at every level. And I think, again, in Virginia, that was one of the issues that resonated with white mothers who moved from Joe Biden in 2020 to the Republican gubernatorial candidate in 2021 because of the perceived lack of local choice in things like education.
I'm going to go around the horn real quick because we've got a lot of territory to cover today, but I'm just going to ask a short question. Was the passage of the infrastructure bill let me back up. I'm changing the questions. I'm thinking about it. All right. The question is this. In the end, will the passage of the infrastructure bill have been a victory or a loss for Democrats? David.
Oh, victory, without question.
Preston.
It's a victory that they won't get credit for because they've stepped on their message.
Dr. Burton.
It's definitely a victory, which may not have been a victory if some among the squad had their way with we need to have this and this rather than saying, okay, let's go for this. And but now, of course, they did play good politics, so they are going to get a vote on the Build Back Better. But it is a victory, and this is how I like to see the victories. One battle at a time. But sometimes you want to win the war in one time.
Yeah, I gave you a little more on that than a yes or no, victory or loss, because you're Dr. Keith Burton. Derrick Green.
Victory.
All right, fantastic. Guys, there are two very significant trials going on right now. One is the trial for the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, the jogger who was shot dead by a couple of white males, and a third that is also on trial who has been implicated in that situation. And then we have the trial of young Kyle Rittenhouse, who is on trial for also shooting people. The story is not so much about the individuals being held accountable. The story has become about the jury selection and the fact that both of these juries are mostly white juries. Lots of people are questioning how this has happened at this time. How could this possibly happen? How can justice be achieved as a consequence of this? And even more so, how can you I'll take the Ahmaud Arbery incident, how can you in a county of 27% blacks have only one black person on that jury? So a lot of finger pointing, a lot of blaming going on right now. David Person, what say you about these two juries?
Well, I think it's a perennial challenge, that we face in our country. It's something that's deeply embedded in the history of American jurisprudence. The struggle to get racially balanced juries. And of course, it speaks to the larger problem, which is we know that there's clearly a trend where white people, just like with voting, whites tend to vote for whites, it seems, historically, without question. And the same thing with juries. Whites tend to be less open-minded or sympathetic to black defendants. So it's a perennial challenge. And I think we should be concerned, especially in the Ahmaud Arbery case. We should be very concerned.
Derrick, you're a person who is keenly connected to the issues of social justice in your role, your specific role, of course, on the ground in New Jersey. That's one of the things that you're focusing on in communities of faith, as well as in the general population as well. Do you have some specific concerns about the challenges that these situations present, not just for the juries themselves now and for the trials themselves, but as we move forward in an increasingly polarized society?
Oh, absolutely. I got a chance to listen to the opening statements of the defense attorney for one of the defendants. And he's clearly talking code to the jury. And I also paid very close attention to how Kyle was the perception and the narrative around him, around the country, is that he's a hero. And that somehow he's a hero when he killed two individuals and wounded a third that evening. On the other hand, the gentleman, Brother Ahmaud, is he seems like he's on trial. His reputation, black men are on trial, and what I get a sense is that that's what they're going to play on, is the fear of black men and the perception that black men are guilty until proven innocent. And that somehow these white men were doing their duty, being pseudo cops. And that's the other thing that concerns me, and that is that the relationship between white males and the police versus the relationship between black men and the police. And you would think that these guys who were the aggressors, who were armed, Brother Arbery was unarmed, and you would think that they were sort of extension of the police department. My concern for the future is that those perceptions of black men have gotten us killed by police. Those perceptions of black men and women have gotten us killed by the police. Those perceptions of black men and women have gotten us turned down from loans, have gotten us not hired, have gotten us our loans turned down. Those perceptions of black and brown people are with us every single day. And we are finding that it is directly negatively impacting our lives. In New Jersey, we've done things, though, to fight against that, particularly when it comes to law enforcement.
I want to share this from the Washington Post editorial board because I think it's pretty significant in terms of what we're dealing with right now. The statement says, and I quote, "Judges have the critical responsibility of safeguarding the rights of defendants to a fair trial, but there's a way to do that without tipping the scale. Consider the care the judge took in the trial of former Minneapolis police officer Derrick Chauvin in monitoring jury selection to ensure a diverse panel. Georgia's Glenn County, where Arbery was killed and the trial of his alleged killers is being held, is nearly 27% Black. A jury hearing the case with just one Black man is an indictment of the criminal justice system that extends beyond the ruling of individual judges. Obstacles to Black people serving on juries, legal experts told NPR, start well before trial begins. Some jurisdictions, for example, select potential jurors from voter rolls, but Black people are often missing from those roles because of barriers to their registering to vote, preemptory challenges, which prosecutors also abuse when it suits their purposes, are also an issue, and states might do well to limit or, as Arizona does, eliminate their use." And of course, this is significant to me because as we think about all of the different actions that have been taking place about voter obstruction, the laws that are being considered in many different states to reduce people's, of course, people say they're defending the integrity of the process, but consequently will reduce people's access to voting. All of these things are interrelated in so many ways. So clearly there's a deeper challenge here, there's a deeper issue, and much more to be considered and thought about. I wanted to shift the conversation in this direction and acknowledge an association that I'm very well acquainted with and have been for many, many years now, the American Psychological Association. And a historic first for one of the oldest and most respected medical organizations in the country, the American Psychological Association has issued a formal apology for its role in both promoting and perpetuating systemic racism. The NPR's Sharon Pruitt-Young reported that, quote, APA, an organization that has been around since the late 1800s, issued a lengthy statement on Friday, October the 29th, apologizing not only for the APA's role in perpetuating systemic racism, but also for the role psychology as a field of study has also played in systemically harming people of color for decades. It apologized for engaging in racism, racial discrimination, and denigration of communities of color. As a result, they failed in their mission to better the lives of others. This is very significant for me as a mental health professional. This is, I think, very significant in light of the fact that the American Medical Association did something similar last year. Dr. Burton, what are your thoughts on these types of acknowledgments and how they have the potential, at least, to stimulate dialogue as it relates to moving this needle forward?
You know, if we were to have a theme for this show today, Kenny, it would be exposing the strategies behind the Southern strategy. You know, and I say that even as we look at the American Psychological Association statement acknowledging that they've been implicit in sort of enforcing this implicit bias, this notion of white supremacy, etc. But if you look at when they were founded again in the late 1800s, it was at a time when this was normal. And when I look at the Southern strategy, even as it relates to this statement, even the conversation we had before, it almost could be reduced to the mantra, we didn't beat them, so we now have to win them. And so in other words, the whole idea of the Civil War was supposed to be secession, right? So there's going to be two Americas in a sense. That didn't happen. You know, we're a United States. So because we're a United States, how do we get everyone to join us? And I think the systems in place were there to sort of enforce this whole notion of white supremacy. And so the American Psychological Association, you know, implicitly, whether consciously or not, have for years in the way in which, for instance, they bought into the notion, or they bought into the notion of eugenics, the whole idea of Blacks and others or the different ethnicities dealing with issues in different ways, etc., have kind of fed into this. And of course, Naim Akbar and others, and I don't want to quote your folk because you might correct me on something, but Naim Akbar and others, you know, have spoken about the way in which, you know, the systems that have been set up do not necessarily relate to the experience of everyone in the Americas. And so when you have these psychological theories, etc., they don't necessarily take into account the full scope of who or what America is. And so even as I look at the courage, I believe, of the American Psychological Association, and I'm praying it's courage and not just the right thing to do at this time, as other people come into terms with the way in which they've been implicated in the critical race theory accusations. So if it is indeed the courage that they have to come out and not necessarily just doing that which is politically correct at the time for those who are progressive, I think it's a message to other institutions. And so when is my institution, my church, my religious institution going to get that courage and acknowledge the role that it has played, that the Seventh-day Adventist Church has played in maintaining the structure of white supremacy? And so, yes, I am glad that the APA came out and apologized and acknowledging that it should not just be a verbal apology, but there are some systemic things that need to be done to ensure that everyone's voice is heard. But I'm hoping that other institutions, you mentioned the AMA, have acknowledged it. I'm not expecting the Southern Baptists to do it anytime soon, but I'm hoping that my institution, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, will stand up and say, yes, we were wrong. We apologize. I'm not talking about what McClure did years ago with the NAD, apologize. No, something tangible, where we're talking the language of reparations and acknowledging certain things like the APA did in their very detailed apology.
Yeah, I was a psychology student over 40 years ago, and I remember a book that we used in one of the classes that Dr. Raymond Wimbush taught, and that book was Even the Rat Was White, a historical view of psychology. Even the rat was white. Think about that for a minute. The idea that we used Skinner boxes, and I won't get too deep into psychology, but a lot of behavioral modification concepts came from those studies of using rats who were basically, made to do conditioned to do certain kinds of things. But that book, Even the Rat Was White, has always stood in my mind in terms of where there's always been this sort of uncomfortable tension between psychology as a movement and the fact that so much of it came from a very racist time in our nation, and that a lot of the foundational principles of Sigmund Freud and others in the early 1900s came from those beliefs about Blacks that existed back then, and then for so many years became the dominant way that those professionals worked with people and tried to understand those individuals, and all of the kinds of things that you've talked about, eugenics and more, Keith, are very important things. I will want to acknowledge, though, that there has been a historic election in the American Psychological Association. The current president-elect is an African-American female. She is Thelma Bryant Davis, professor of psychology and director of the Culture and Trauma Research Lab at the Graduate School of Education and Psychology. And Preston, I would say that simply to say that it is important for us, as part of this moving forward, to be able to put people of color in leadership roles, to be able to have the opportunity to do deep dives into what exists and then make determinations about how we move forward in those processes. Would you agree with me on that?
I definitely agree with you on that, Kenny. But I'm still troubled because these apologies, and I'm always happy to accept an apology, but history has the power to embarrass you. And in my view, these apologies always come with embarrassment or the avoidance of embarrassment of their history staring them in the face. So ways to avoid that going forward is very definitely to have inclusion in your leadership, to have diversity in your leadership, but also to do that proactively, not in response to the immediate embarrassment of your history staring you in the face.
Good point indeed. I want to talk just for a few minutes. I know we're going to have to continue this on the other side of the hour marker, but I want to welcome Stephen Foster back to the conversation as well. Welcome back, Stephen. It's good to see you here today, and we're still anxiously waiting to hear from you. And we got some good stuff that I know you want to jump in on as well. But I want to talk a little bit, and I know all of you could pontificate and wax eloquently about the next thing that I say. But if you do so, we'll run out of time. So just kind of keep it in a nice compact format. I want to ask you about the legacy of Colin Powell. We lost Colin Powell since the last time that this group convened. In fact, it was a day after, I believe, that this group last convened, so we didn't have a chance to talk about it. This is our first time to really reflect on the life and the legacy of the great Colin Powell. David Person, I'm going to start with you. Just before the break here, you got about 4 minutes to share a little bit about Colin Powell.
And I won't even take the 4 minutes, Kenny. I'm going to say it very succinctly. Colin Powell was a great man, and he represented, I think, the last of those Republicans who were, especially in the Black community, who were able to successfully balance Republican values, which have evolved and transitioned through the years, with being Black people and being connected to their Blackness. My impression of Secretary of State Powell is that he never forgot that he was a Black man in America, even though he was a member of this party. And that is what ultimately led to some decisions that he made towards the end of his tenure with the Republican Party that I think was concerning to his fellow Republicans and others. So I pay tribute to him in that way. He reminds me of Edward Brooke, former senator from Massachusetts, and others who were able to walk that line and keep that balance.
Stephen Foster, can you do it in 2 minutes?
Yeah, David, I said almost exactly what I was going to say relative to General Powell being the last hope, essentially, for the Republican Party, for serious Black people. He was a serious Black man. He understood his history. He understood his personal history as well as his people's history, and he gravitated to the Republican Party for various reasons, among them, of course, foreign policy. But he was their last best hope, and he saw the party drifting to this racial, tribal, authoritarian cult that it's become. He saw that. He anticipated it a little bit, but he saw it. It really got exposed with the Obama campaign, and he was it. But he was a great man. There's no question about it.
I've got time for Derrick Green still. We're doing well here, fellas.
I'll just say this in a minute or less, that the Republican Party, the modern day Republican Party, I call it the modern day, probably 1964, 65 until now. It didn't get like this. It didn't get like this just yesterday or Donald Trump. It's been on a slippery slope, and communicating to racists, being a party for racists, where racists find a home for years. And so that's on that. General Powell, to me, was a role model. He was somebody that when we saw him, we could be proud of him. My only issue with General Powell, because I believe, I am someone who believes in humankind. And we don't talk about the Iraqis and how the Iraqis viewed the statement of weapons of mass destruction. Weapons of mass destruction. And we don't, because we haven't visited Iraq. I have not. We don't see the destruction of families, of cousins, of grandfathers, of property, of homes, of mosques, of churches, whatever, because of a statement of weapons of mass destruction. And we went to war. George Bush will have to pay for that war. We all have to pay for our stuff at the judgment, but he's going to have to pay for that war. And Iraqi people are people. They are part of humanity. So that's the only thing that I would say as far as I don't know everything that he did. I was always proud of him when I saw, but emotionally, I had a big problem with weapons of mass destruction because it destroyed an entire country.
I'm going to come back to you, Keith, on the other side of this short break and get your reflections as you kind of bring up the rear on this good conversation that we're having just now. But I'll touch base with you on the other side of this short break that we have. I want to let people know that you're listening to Second Chance. I'm Kenny Anderson, and I hope that you're having a fabulous day. Welcome back to the Second Chance broadcast. I'm Kenny Anderson, host and producer of the show. It's the What's Going On segment that takes place every first and third Sunday of the month. It is my social and political roundtable and an opportunity to have a deep conversation with some brothers who have some deep insight on things because that's what they do. And so I'm happy to have them with us this afternoon. Preston Foster's with us, Stephen Foster, David Person, Dr. Keith Burton, and Derrick Green joining us all the way from the great state of New Jersey, where his governor just eked out a big victory in the past couple of days. And of course, we wish Governor Murphy and your team well as you move forward in this process. Dr. Burton, just before the break, I was going to let you chime in on your thoughts about the legacy of General Colin Powell.
Yes, and so of course, I'm going to call him Colin Powell. That's what his parents named him, Colin Powell. But even as I call him Colin, though, thinking about his legacy, and I see how Colin became Colin, became Colin. And what do I mean by that? They started calling him Colin Powell when he went to basic training down south. I think it was Fort Benning. And I guess it was the Southern way of saying Colin. They called him Colin, and it kind of stuck. And then after a while, he started referring to himself as Colin. But if you hear his parents or siblings speak, they refer to him as Colin, which is actually his name. And what I think, even as he developed politically and decided to align himself to Republican values, that Colin started to realize that he was really Colin initially, Derrick, when he was used by the Bush administration in Iraq. And he realized that he was used, and we know his eventual exit, and he's actually spoken publicly about it, because he wanted to be sure that the report he was given was an accurate report. Now, of course, he was a militarist, he was into, war, and it was Schwarzkopf, I believe, who came up with this whole shock and awe idea, but he was definitely one who embraced it in a sense, and the whole notion of collateral damage, etc. He was right there. But I do applaud the fact that he did realize the errors of his ways and basically spoke out against the people who sort of pushed him in the front line so that he could be the face of this Iraqi war. And also, as I look at Colin Powell, I'm looking at a person who understood what it means to align oneself to a political party in a truly political way in which people are first, because politics should really be about the people first. And so he was a man who was a Republican, but he publicly voted for Obama. He endorsed Biden, because he understood that just because you belong to a party doesn't mean that you blindly follow everything that that party says and that party does. So I think that's a legacy that he leaves behind. Unfortunately, I don't believe that many people are going to embrace that legacy. But when I think of Colin, I think of this African American whose parents, of course, came here from Jamaica, who understood that one does make errors, one does make mistakes, and one can apologize, number one. And number two, just because you align yourself to a party doesn't mean that you have to rubber stamp everything that party says.
So let's talk a little NFL football, something that I don't typically do on this show because I'm still protesting the NFL. But anytime a story within the NFL emerges that's worthy of conversation, then I'm always game to have that conversation. So guys, let's talk about Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers has been discovered to be a person who had not been vaccinated, who suggested that he had been vaccinated, and was in the past few days, it was discovered that Aaron Rodgers, of course, was COVID positive, would have to miss a few games, and then he, of course, had to face the press, and I believe only yesterday actually admitted to being unvaccinated. We've also seen the tensions that have been placed upon NBA players. We've had that conversation before, and so much more. COVID in sports, and it's interesting, I think, how sports always becomes part of the central story of anything. It speaks to how all-consuming sports is in our lives at times. But is there something that is instructive about the Aaron Rodgers revelation, Stephen Foster?
The contrast, again, with the way the NBA has handled its COVID, the COVID crisis, specifically the NBA Players Association, in conjunction, of course, with the governors. But because this would have been this was not possible, I don't think, in the NBA. And it's kind of mind-boggling that it happened in the NFL. I mean, how somebody can get away with not being vaccinated, but say that they were, or imply that they were. I don't even know how that's even possible. It seems like there'd be, as much medical attention as these guys get, it seemed like that would be impossible to pull off. So just the contrast, and the fact that, again, everything, there's a racial component to everything. If a black guy had done this, there would be no coming back from it. There'd be no coming back from it. But Aaron Rodgers is a matinee idol quarterback in the NFL, a prototypical quarterback, and he eventually will somehow live this down.
Has anyone seen Colin in Black and White, the Colin Kaepernick series on Netflix? Dave Person. All right, jump on in here, Dave. So Netflix, as it has, listen to the last time we talked about Dave Chappelle. So there's always something controversy involving Netflix. I certainly don't work for Netflix. I have it, and if they want to, slice a chunk of cheese off on me, that's fine. But I think that they have some great programming and some very enlightening things that can educate people and inspire people. You've seen a little bit of the series, Dave. What do you think about it thus far?
I think it's, I've seen the whole thing, actually, and I think it's great. I think it's a very creative, from an artistic standpoint, it's very creative. The sort of way that they have used narration in a creative way to tell a story and fusing that with some theatrical kind of drama. I think it was very effective. I also think it's very honest and penetrating in its honesty, in that it portrays his parents as real people who, on the one hand, were very loving and supportive of their son, but on the other hand, clueless really about how to raise a young black man. And so both of those things were addressed. I also think it was fascinating to kind of have him take us inside his perception of his journey as being a very challenged one, where he was always sort of the afterthought or being left behind. Some would say that's self-serving, but I think it was a legitimate self-assessment. So I loved it.
He's getting some pushback too on his analogy of the NFL being in some ways, and he's not the first person that said it, by the way, but just the whole notion of an open market for slaves. And he's really facing a lot of pushback as far as that's concerned. What were your thoughts about that, Dave?
I think he has a right to his opinion, first of all. And as you said, he's not the first one to suggest such a connection or to make those analogous. In fact, the great New York Times sports columnist Bill Rhoden wrote a book, I believe, called something about a plantation, and he was looking at college sports and I believe professional sports also through the lens of slavery and that using it as a metaphor. I think he's got a right to his opinion, and I think he's right. There are some similarities.
Yeah, Bill Rhoden's book was $40 Million Slaves.
Oh, there it is. Thank you.
Yeah. So it came out several years ago. So again, not the first time. And again, Colin Kaepernick, I think, interestingly, touches the nerves of lots and lots of people for a good reason, because he's squarely, in terms of his perceptions about things, hitting on topics and hitting on themes that are consistent with the way some people have experienced life in America. And of course, as Dave said, he has a right to his opinion. And of course, people have a right to what they think about those opinions. And of course, that makes everything interesting. I want to get back to politics here for a minute, because there were a bunch of races that took place in the mayoral arena. One of those being my home city of New York City, where Eric Adams became the second black mayor. That still kind of blows my mind that a city that is oftentimes seen as progressive as New York has only had just now in 2021 the second black mayor. Of course, we know that first mayor was David Dinkins and how big that deal was when David Dinkins became mayor in New York. But we also had key races in Atlanta where Kasim Reed was beaten by the council president. He was trying to take back his position as mayor of Atlanta. We had in Boston the first Asian woman elected, Michelle Wu. Aftab Purival won election in Cincinnati. He's an Indian. We had in Durham, North Carolina, Elaine O'Neill, an African-American woman, and in Pittsburgh, an African-American male, Ed Gainey. So significant gains in terms of people of color as it relates to these mayoral elections. Derrick Green, what are your thoughts about those wins and where we are in terms of the political landscape regarding people of color?
Huge wins. And I think, again, we're talking about the progressive coalition in these cities. Brother Eric, I believe, should be the face of the Democratic Party. He was able to capture the hearts and minds of many different groups, including law enforcement. And I think that he brings a sensible approach to governing as being borough president of Brooklyn, and he brought that to his campaign, and he's going to bring that as mayor. I do again believe that these other races, the mayor of Pittsburgh, Durham, North Carolina, I think you're seeing the evidence of this progressive coalition of women, of minorities, of labor, of faith, of LGBTQ coming together and really being able to get around candidates and campaigns and lead them to victory. We've seen it in New Jersey, and we're going to see it all around the country if we're able to do it.
Preston, the city of Minneapolis had on its ballot an initiative to amend the city charter to replace the police department with a Department of Public Safety that would have been managed by the mayor as well as the city council. It was a type of defund the police initiative, a rallying cry that has gone out across our nation in many different cities. And yet, not only Minneapolis, there were a few other cities that had similar kinds of initiatives on their ballots. For the most part, were all defeated. And there's been a lot of conversation around the fact that the whole notion of those who have called for defunding the police have essentially found no leg room in terms of getting some momentum moving forward in that process. What are your thoughts about, is it rest in peace now for defund the police, or where does this particular movement go?
Well, I hope it's rest in peace for the slogan defund the police, but in terms of police reform itself, my view is that there's a very short window, very short window for moving reform through the system and having people embrace it. And by that, I mean the time from the time that George Floyd was killed until the time that the opportunity to reform the police presents itself has to be a very short period, because the longer the gap gets between the seminal event that focuses people on the need to reform the police and the actual opportunity to reform the police, the longer that gets, the less likely it is that reform itself will actually happen. It's my view that police in America are there on purpose. They are there, they exist to police Black people. And every now and then when someone like George Floyd gets murdered, America does feel guilty enough to do something about it. But as I said, the longer that gap gets between the event and the opportunity to reform it, the less likely it is to happen, because America has been triggered to fear Black people and to feel that when Black people are being killed by police, that it somehow makes white people safer. So I'm sad to see these initiatives go down, but I wish we could find a way to propose these solutions sooner.
All right. I was going to follow that up, but I'm going to move on, because I want to ask this about something that I'm seeing a lot more that is, for me, deeply unsettling and disturbing. And that is all of these unruly passengers who are on airplanes these days, the fights that are breaking out, the people who are attacking air travel professionals or personnel on planes, at the gates, at the counters. Transportation Secretary Buttigieg last week was asked a question about a no-fly policy for people who are unruly. That seemed pretty common sense to me. It's sort of like, I can get banned from a store or a particular situation simply because of my unruly behavior. It seems pretty basic and pretty common sense. There is a terrorist no-fly list, and people literally land on that list who aren't terrorists. And so it would seem like the no-fly list for unruly passengers makes sense. And I just wonder, from these frequent flyers on this call today, what your thoughts are about, not that you're unruly passengers, of course. I'm just talking about, you guys are the safe people, but the threat of seeing unruly people on the plane is unsettling to me. People have been doing things, some of these videos, they did that on the plane. It's almost like, wow, this is crazy. They don't need to be on the plane. They need to be in mental health treatment. So I'll start with Stephen Foster. Should there be a no-fly list for unruly passengers that, I'll add this to it, that is shared between airlines, not just banning one person from a particular airline, but just sharing it across airlines?
Most definitely. I just would be a little wary about what specifically qualifies as unruly. But yeah, any behavior that is in any way violent or threatening or just out of the ordinary is disturbing at an airport or really almost in any public setting, but much less one where we have a history of tragedy, criminal tragedies. So yeah, I would not be against it. I'm just, as a civil libertarian, I'm a little concerned about what actually would be deemed unruly, mainly because of the arbitrary, potentially arbitrary nature of who decides what's unruly.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm just simply going to point to the incidents that I've seen where there have been passengers just sort of pummeling one another on top of other passengers who have nothing to do with the fight. I think that would probably qualify as unruly. I think that the incidents in which people have been threatening the flight attendant that was punched out last week, I think that would be unruly. I'm talking about those extreme incidents, and I think it's probably enough room, to your point, to be able to identify a fairly solid list of what would be unruly in a particular situation. Because anytime you engage people who have nothing to do with the conflict initially, that potentially threatens other people as well. And
Right.
those are the ones I've been particularly disturbed about, when it's been like a rolling fight down that very narrow aisle that we all have walked down on planes.
Right.
I have a tough enough time bringing my little Roland on board and my little carry-on down that thing, much less somebody start to duke it out, man. That's kind of crazy. An international flyer and frequent flyer, Dr. Keith Burton, what are your thoughts about getting these unruly passengers out of my way?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with Steve. I do think that there needs to be some action taken against them, but I think it needs to be a well thought out policy. And so I think airlines should be left dependent upon severity. And I think it has to be something that can be objectively attested to, because again, speaking from Steve's civil libertarian perspective, you could always take this and use it willy-nilly just to just focus on a certain group of people and say, well, we don't like that group of people flying with us, etc. And we've already seen that actually with this whole Muslim ban, etc. Right? So we've seen how that can be. I do think that if there are some objective methods for identifying dangerous behavior, then airlines should be able to say, you can't fly with us anymore. And then if it gets to the point of criminality, and the federal government says that this person definitely broke a law and they're convicted, then it should be across all airlines in that sense. But I do think that there should be a policy that's fair so that those who are affected by it, to protect the rest of us, because again, I don't know, I always think of myself as one, if I saw something like that happen and will kind of step in to try to temper it down. But if I stepped in to try to temper it down, who knows if I would be seen as one of those who are part of the fracas point of view. And so it's a difficult thing, because yes, it can help in some instances, but it may even hurt those who may sort of hold themselves back in trying to help and stop different disturbances because of what may happen to them. But I do think if there's a well thought out policy, that yes, it only makes sense that those who would make trouble should be banned. I must say this though, when I looked at the different reporting on this because I was thinking, I wonder if a lot of this has to do with mass mandates, and some of it is, but most of it actually is tied into alcohol consumption. And so again, looking at some of the root causes of this, people who are becoming violent, a lot of them is alcohol related. And so I think that's another thing that we need to think about too, even as we think about policy as a way of dealing with this.
Right, yeah, and alcohol, which of course they serve on planes. And so,
Yes.
I mean, there's some culpability in that process as well, probably as it relates to the airlines and looking at their own policies and procedures and practices. Maybe that fly list or no fly list, restricts people from having alcohol or whatever. I mean, something needs to be done in that process, no question about that. But a lot of it also has to do, Keith, with just people being frustrated and irritated, not wanting to be told to do certain kinds of things. When you're on a plane, it's very interesting. That this has been my experience of flying now for 40 years. I'm a very obedient person on a plane. I'm extremely obedient, and I get even more obedient the further up the plane goes. So that by the time we hit 30,000 feet, I'm the most obedient person in the world. I mean, just what do you want me or need me to do? That's it, just like that. Because what goes up must come down. But I want it to come down in a way that we went up. I want it to be a safe situation. And so as I'm thinking about this whole experience, I'm the guy who, when they start, as many times as I've had this experience, when they start talking about the safety protocols, I pick up. Yeah, I do. I pick it up and I'm reading through it. I'm doing it. I mean, maybe something has changed. How would I know? Nothing is static. And so I'm trying to pay attention. When they start talking about those lights are going to illuminate, I want to see where the lights are. I'm very conscientious about where the exits are, who's sitting there, exits. I'm aware of all of those kinds of things when I'm on a plane because I respect gravity. I expect 30,000 feet. I mean, I just do. I mean, it's just common sense, practical stuff. David Preston, what say you about these unruly passengers?
Well, I say that I keep in mind that I, have to be ready to throw hands if necessary, because I'm not going out like a sucker at 30,000 feet. I'm sorry. I'm a pacifist until you push me, and then I'm just going to, hey, do what I got to do. Seriously, and actually that I'm being pretty serious there, but I mean, it does concern me. I think we've reached a very scary point in our society where there are a lot of entitled, privileged people walking around who feel that they can just behave any kind of way under any circumstance and exhibit any kind of attitude that they have, and basically to heck with everybody else. And that does concern me, which again is why I also have the mindset that if I got to throw hands, I got to throw hands.
I want to switch to talking about throwing hands. We hadn't seen it yet, but who knows? I mean, this is a wide open field right now. Senate Republicans have blocked the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which is, for me, essential as a part of whatever successes the Biden administration considers that it has, or this particular Congress considers that it has. I asked the question the last time we met, is it time to end the filibuster? Is it time to go gangster in Congress for the Democrats? Derrick Green, what do you say?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's time to go gangster. This is for them, the Republicans, this is the Civil War. They're still fighting the Civil War. And they know that the John Lewis Act would strengthen voting protections around the nation. They also know their strategy, because they are strategists. The Republican Party, they are really, really good at strategizing. They also know that they are looking to suppress Black and brown people's voting power in states that are key for the midterms. So if they can be successful at doing that, they can begin to take over the House and maybe also take back the Senate, and then we'll have utter chaos. And then they think that they're going to take over the presidency in 2024. So the Democrats need to do whatever they need to do to get this passed. because really we could be looking at states and congressional districts that turn R in 2022. And they know that. So we got to do what we can to get this bill passed.
Preston, a lot of people say that if you end the filibuster now, you're setting a horrible precedent for generations to come. And of course, you hear that coming from a lot of Democrats as well. I don't hear a whole lot of Republicans saying that, but I hear a lot of Democrats saying that. We have to be very careful and very guarded about what we do for what happens going forward. The reality is that the Democrats are in some serious trouble at the midterm next year in terms of holding on to their seat of power. They're in serious trouble as it relates to 24, as it relates to holding on to their seat of power. So if it's really a matter of who gets to really, hold control, that may not even be as big of an issue as many of the Democrats think it is. And maybe ending the filibuster is the thing to do to get things done now and not worry about what happens on the other side of another election that hasn't been held yet, that has so much uncertainty attached to it. What do you say, Preston?
Yeah, your original question, Kenny, is it time to end the filibuster? And my answer is no, it's past time to end the filibuster. Normality ended in 2016. And I'm not talking about when Donald Trump was elected. I'm talking about when the Republican Senate refused to consider the nomination of Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court. That lets you know that gangster time was in play. And if you're not willing to play that game, then you are saying, I'm willing to lose. Since November of 2020, 38 states or localities have passed laws to basically suppress the vote when there's been no evidence of voter fraud. And so, again, they are moving at the state and local level and more importantly, at the state level to be able to disregard the will of the people. So for me, and I think you said this as well, Kenny, for me, the Voting Rights Act is issue one. And I think it should be issue one for all Americans, because without the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, the federal government has no vehicle to intervene in states to protect the rights of Blacks who have been historically denied the right to vote. And since 2013, since the Shelby v. Holder decision that gutted the Voting Rights Act of 1965, as soon as that decision was made, the very next week, some of the very states that had been under the pre-clearance statute of that act began suppressing the Black vote again. So again, the opponent is one who is fighting not only with bare knuckles, but with brass knuckles. And we're still talking about returning to normal operation in the Senate. And that time is long gone.
Yeah. Stephen Foster, I've been waiting to ask you this question just because I just want to hear from you right now. Joe Manchin, many Democrats feel like Joe Manchin is a lost cause for whatever reason they're thinking that. Kristen Sinema, lost cause. We can't count on them. They're actually the 50th and 51st Republican senators in many people's minds. Do we end the filibuster? And let me ask you this question, because I know I want you to think about both sides of this. What are the pros and cons of ending the filibuster?
Well, the con, of course, is that we will just permit Mitch McConnell and the Republicans to go hog wild and not only, put any kind of judge any kind of right-wing nut on the federal bench for life, which they've already done. But it will allow them to pass any kind of law with no pushback, no recourse. It will be the Wild West. I mean, they will pass any kind of law, because we've got really. This is the truth. We're really in the last years of the United States functioning as a pluralistic, secular republic based on democratic principles. Black people are the only thing. Black people are the only thing propping up the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party is the only thing but standing between us as a civil functioning society and flat out authoritarianism. And so once the filibuster is gone, it's over. It's over. I mean, all they need is the White House, because the chances of them taking control of the House and Senate are very likely under any normal circumstances. And these are not normal circumstances or conditions, but so all they would need is a Republican president, and there's with the kind of Republicans that are being elected now, the Marjorie Taylor Greene types that are being elected now, it's I don't see any hope. I'm not talking apocalyptically for the world. I'm just talking about the United States as a functioning, pluralistic, secular society based on democratic principles.
So no pros in that process.
Yeah, no, because what's going to happen is by the time they pass any law relative to the John Lewis Voting Act or police reform, if they can do it and get it done, get it passed, but you can see now you've got Manchin and Sinema blocking that. They don't want to do anything with the filibuster. Manchin doesn't really want to do anything with the filibuster. He gives lip service to being willing to do a little bit here and a little bit there to tweak this, but he's really not for changing anything. He thinks that we need to restore normal order or regular procedure, or so he thinks that you can work with Republicans. That's his modus operandi. He thinks that that's possible. He thinks we're living in 1970 or something. I mean, so it's I don't see. It's a no-win situation. We're between a rock and a hard place. We need to get rid of it, but when we get rid of it, it'll be Katie bar the door.
Well, then let's talk about something that's a little clearer, and that is the great GOAT debate in the NBA. This certainly is something that has an answer, a definite answer, one that can be objectively determined. With the 75th anniversary of the great NBA. By the way, the NBA season has been phenomenal thus far. It was nothing more than the fact that the Knicks are back. And whether that's legitimate or not, I don't know yet, but I'm real happy about what I see so far. I'm able to watch Knicks games without the same level of pain that I've endured over the last 30 years. And that's a long time. But I want to ask this question. I'll start with, let me start with Preston. So, and let me give you this quote here. I wanted to, and all of you guys can respond to this however you choose to, but Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is a sage when it comes to NBA and sports knowledge, and I deeply respect Kareem and love when he stirs the pot too, because Kareem is not just stirring the pot as some emotional, impulsive guy out there. He's a guy who's steeped in the game and the tradition of the game with some of the most incredible athleticism that we've ever seen in the game. And he's a scholar. Kareem is a scholar. So, I mean, he studies these things and he just doesn't come out and say things off the cuff. All right, so here's what Kareem said. Here's what you need to respond to. Kareem says, it affects me, and this is a quote, it affects me in that it makes me see that people don't have a very good perspective. This is in regards to the question of who is the GOAT. I saw Wilt Chamberlain play. Nobody that's talking that GOAT stuff now probably even saw him play. They haven't seen Bill Russell play. And Bill Russell won 8 NBA championships in a row. But they have no idea of how he played or how Oscar Robertson played or Jerry West played. I mean, Kareem was dropping some stuff there. I'm going to start with Preston Foster. What are your thoughts about what Kareem has to say about the GOAT debate?
Well, I'm a Kareem man. I'm a Kareem man regarding the GOAT, and I'm a Kareem man regarding basketball and just wisdom. Kareem was in college during Bill Russell's last year in the NBA. I think he was a senior in Bill Russell's last year in the NBA. He played against everybody from Wilt to Jordan and won championships on both ends of that span. And so Stephen put up this week a list of the 10 best point guards in the NBA. Tiny Archibald didn't even come up. Nate Archibald didn't even come up.
It wasn't my list. I posted it. That's just a caveat to asterisk.
No, because everybody knows that Stephen remembers all of this very well, as though it was yesterday. But my point is that the memory of these so-called experts is as long as they have been personally watching the NBA. There is no appreciation of history or interest in history whatsoever. I mean, and there are films of these guys playing, and there's statistics to compare them with. But because we are so narcissistic about our fandom in terms of, well, I saw this guy or he was my favorite, there's no appreciation for what they did. I mean, because Wilt Chamberlain just scored 100 points in a game. And they said, well, the rules were different, the quality was different. But even if I were playing against 5 little girls, I couldn't score 100 points. So scoring 100 points in a game against the best players who existed in the world at that time is a substantial feat. And so I take that everything that Kareem said there as, Kareem, one of the things I appreciate about him most is that he's understated. And I think he understates his case even there.
David, on any all-time greats list, there are going to be some snubs. And the 75th anniversary NBA list had some significant snubs. And I'm just going to give you a few of those snubs, and then we get back to the GOAT debate. Dwight Howard, and any of these you can debate at some level or another. There's no question about it. But when you think about some of these guys that we've seen play, the level that they played at, it's kind of interesting. Dwight Howard, Paul Gasol, Vince Carter, Dikembe Mutombo, Tony Parker, Tracy McGrady, Yao Ming, Penny Hardaway, and a few others. On the question of the GOAT, the question of the NBA GOAT could literally be one of the most challenging questions in the world of any sort. And so when you think about the GOAT, and I'm going to really transfer this across sports, when you think about the GOAT, what do you think are the key ingredients of the GOAT?
Well, if we're even going to have this conversation, which I kind of wonder about the efficacy of it, because again, especially in basketball, probably more than any other sport, it has evolved so dramatically. The rule changes have really created almost a different sport in some ways. If you think about it, the way the ball is handled, the 3-point shot, and that they allow zone defense now and other things. But if you're going to have that conversation, to me, it's got to start with offensive production, and the volume of offensive production, which is why I think, with Preston, I'd have to say, if I'm going to have to pick somebody, I don't know how you don't pick Kareem because of that just in and of itself. I mean, he's got more points than anybody else in the history of the league. So how do you not pick Kareem? But then you also would have to factor in championships. And if you do that and you look at, well, who led a team to more championships in anybody else in a more dominant way, you got to talk about Bill Russell. So, it just seems to me like it's a tricky thing. I mean, personally, I've always said if I had to pick a starting five that I wanted to play with or I wanted to see play, my first pick actually wouldn't even be Kareem or Bill Russell. As much respect as I have for them, it would be Magic Johnson. But again, so it gets a little subjective even, just based on skill sets and what people like to see. And, but I mean, it seems to me like offensive production and championships have to be key ingredients.
So okay, championships and effectiveness. Derrick Green, core ingredients. Again, I want to go back to that across sports now because you've got the GOAT debate in a lot of different areas as it relates to sports. But core ingredients. I mean, what does one look for in order to, or what should be the standard that one looks for in terms of ingredients? Because they can be subjective. There's no question about that, especially as we talk about comparing eras and things of that nature. But core ingredients for the GOAT. Not hearing you, Derrick, for some reason.
I would say, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. I would say impact on the game. Who made that impact? I don't know if it's fair to say GOAT or whether to say the GOAT of the time that they were playing. Because I think that Bill Russell, he was the GOAT at that time. You had Oscar Robertson, of course Kareem, but then Magic came, and then Jordan, and then LeBron, so and Kobe. So you have, I think you have to look at the region or the time that they were playing in to really make that conclusion. But who had an impact on the game? I would say I'm a fan of Magic Johnson's and big fan. I wore purple and gold. I had purple and gold Converse. I had his number and all that, right? I did the look away passes and all that. But Magic Johnson and you have to bring Larry Bird in there. I mean, they both had an impact on the game that was second to none. Kareem had a shot that you could not defend against. So I don't know if it's fair to say the GOAT of all time or the GOAT of certain time. I will say that Preston Foster is probably one of the GOATs of Pine Forge Academy. I would say that,
Such an astute young man, I tell you.
Hey, sign Derrick up.
You and Batty, you can battle that one out.
Yeah. Hey, sign Derrick up for a few more segments, right? And it's fascinating too, because the point that was made, I think David first made the point about just eras and how sometimes it's difficult to balance that. I think Stephen referenced that as well. When you think about not just eras, but you think about the longevity of a player. Gale Sayers' career got cut short because of an injury. Barry Sanders walked away from the game. You think about what some of those people would have done had they stayed in the game. Mm-hmm. Wow. If Ken Griffey Jr. had not been injured as much as he was, would he not be the home run king today? Mm. It's very possible. So, you've got all these different variables and all these different factors. But the real question I want to ask right now is of Dr. Burton. Dr. Burton, who is the GOAT in the real football? I'm not talking about football as we know it here in America. I'm talking about the real football in the world. Who's the GOAT?
Okay, now of course we're going back to criteria now, right? And yeah, as Derrick just said, we should talk about the GOAT. Well, we could talk about the GOAT. We could also talk about the GOT, right? The greatest of that time. So the GOT or the GOAT. But I think, when I look at this whole GOAT conversation, again, I chuckle sometimes because oftentimes we use standards and people with whom we're familiar to sort of go back how many years since Neesmith invented basketball or since they started playing soccer, football, etc. And so when I think about the conversation about GOAT, I don't think it has to do necessarily with athletic ability, but it has to do with celebrity. Okay, so when we talk about boxing, for instance, it has to be Muhammad Ali. When we talk about, tennis, we got the Williams sisters or, the McEnroe, whoever. And so when it comes to soccer, of course, you have to talk about Pele. You can talk about Maradona. I mean, those names are there. And I think when you look at Pele, for instance, it was his entertainment ability, his ability not only to exercise skill on the field, but he had that charisma to attract that international attention that wherever you went, everyone knew who you were. And so I don't think all the time it's necessarily about athletic ability, but whether or not, this person is such a great entertainer that aura exudes the sport.
And it also, I've said this before, and people, of course, feel any way they want to about these GOATs and the standard upon which they apply the label. But, I look at somebody like LeBron, whose career is not over yet. He's still got some more playing time. But, when it all washes out, in my mind, if I take the standard that you all are using right now about, eras and things of that nature, LeBron's got to be my GOAT simply because of what he's done on and off the court. I think that off the court, you are an extension of who you are on the court or the field or whatever it is that you're out there playing. You absolutely are. And the reason I say that is because look at what happens to players who mess up off the field. Look at players who run into trouble off the field. Look at Pete Rose is not in the Hall of Fame. One of the greatest hitters ever. And so it has to be some calculation in there for me when I start talking about the GOAT. And then to the question about eras again, I mean, LeBron is getting paid Fort Knox money, and Bill Russell was paid whatever, Bank of Commerce Bank money. I mean, whatever it was. But, it's a different standard in terms of the pay. So LeBron has so much more that he can use, but he also has a social consciousness in order to apply that. And I think that means a whole lot, especially being the age that he is and engaged the way he is and making the huge footprint that he is. I think all of that, to me, speaks to who the GOAT is. And this has, of course, been a great conversation. It is now time, as we wrap up the broadcast, for Commentators' Choices. We're going to start out with Preston Foster. Give us what you got.
Thank you, Kenny. I have two things. One, tomorrow, November 8th at 6 p.m. at the Oakwood University Community Health Action Center, there will be a meeting about redistricting with Councilman Meredith. This meeting was called at the behest of President Leslie Pollard, and I want to congratulate him on that. He's asked our community and he's asked our students to be proactive in getting our community to come out to talk to the councilman about redistricting, because that issue determines how we are represented. And our students, the Oakwood chapter of the NAACP and the United Collegiate Black Scholars have been out in the community trying to get people to show up and to make their voices heard tomorrow at 6 p.m. at the Oakwood Community Health Action Center. And secondly, I do want to say just a quick word about General Colin Powell. Colin Powell was a White House fellow in 1972-73 under Caspar Weinberger. I think that's why he affiliated with the Republicans. I don't think he was a political person at all. I think he was a soldier and a patriot who affiliated with those who brought him into the political realm. But what I respect him most for, in addition to never forgetting who he was his ability to admit a mistake. And that's what he did regarding Iraq. Iraq was a horrific mistake, maybe the greatest mistake of the last century politically that anyone has ever made. But Colin Powell did fess up to his mistake and tried to do his best to do right by that. So I honor him both in life and in death. May he rest in peace. General Powell, you made us less cynical and more aware of our responsibility as Americans.
Dr. Keith Burton.
Yes, I would also like to provide a little obituary of Dr. Ernest E. Rodgers, who passed on November 5th. I believe he was either 103 or 104 years old.
105.
105, sorry. And I know because he's like my spiritual grandfather, so I should know his age. But of course, he was the first Black professor of biblical languages at Oakwood University, got his PhD from Michigan State University in the area of speech and rhetoric. And he was a mentor to me in so many ways, and he will definitely be missed. He taught me so many things, particularly about life. I remember when I was a student at Oakwood, and there was a time when he asked me to cover his class for him when he was away, and I had my lectures prepared, and I was covering the class for 2 weeks, and I was doing the lecture and everything else, and grading. And I was tough, man. I mean, goodness. One of my colleagues recently admitted that my classmates got together like, here comes the dreamer, let us kill him, because I had no room at all. I had the lecture down, I gave the test. I had no flexibility at all. And so when Dr. Rodgers came back, he said, Keith, we need to talk. And so he pulled me into his office and he said, I know you want to do a good job. And I know that, you want to make sure that your colleagues are learning as much as you are in the class. But, you have to live with them. And so you got to think about how tough you really want to be, because at the end of the day, these are the guys you have to live with. So please, please, please remember grace. And I've always remembered that lesson from Dr. Rodgers. I thought I was being the teacher he wanted me to be, but he's like, nah, bro, you got to live with these people. Think about what you're doing. So I will always remember him for that. And again, a loving person. He fought a good fight. He kept the faith. He's finished the course, and I know there's a crown that's waiting for him. Dr. E. Rodgers. May he rest in peace.
Indeed. Rest in peace for Dr. Rodgers as we reflect on his life, his legacy, and also thoughts and prayers out to his family. Our condolences on behalf of the Second Chance family as you go through this period of reflection and transition. A great man indeed. Has been a part of my life here at Oakwood as long as I've been here. And of course, much longer before that, as an integral part of this community, has made tremendous contributions to this Oakwood family, to the Seventh-day Adventist Church, to others around this nation and around the world. And so he will definitely be missed. I tell you, he hadn't missed a step. He had his 105th birthday this past summer, in fact, in June or July, and just hadn't missed a step. I mean, just seemed to be continuing to move forward, and was such a great inspiration. So he will definitely be missed, but he has left a tremendous legacy. Derrick Green, commentator's choice.
Sure. Thank you, Kenny. First of all, thank you, Kenny, for inviting me to be on this show. Thank you for all that you do, and for allowing me to share with these dynamic, brilliant brothers. Particularly, I want to say thank you to you and Preston and Dave, and how you have helped me over the years since I was very young, and helping me shape my mind. I've looked up to the three of you in a major way. And a lot that I am doing today has a lot to do with the support that the three of you have given me my entire life. And I thank you for that. Let me say that we are in critical times politically in this country. And we really, I'm a Democrat. And I would also say that we need to look into our humanity, no matter what party you are a part of, Democrats or Republicans. Democrats, we got to organize. People are looking for us to solve problems. Do not let the Southern strategy of Republicans tear us away from what we need to be doing, and that is knocking on doors. That's organizing in our faith communities, bringing people together, solving their problems, and making them not identify with this race identity politics, but what's going to be good for the future. Let us not give in to the threat of that many white Americans are fearing right now, and that is that there's going to be this black and brown takeover of this nation, a sort of a survivalist mentality. Rather, let's look at us as Americans, when we rise together. And rising together means that people have a livable wage, that they have health care, that they have a good place to live, and that your neighbors respect you, and that folks can get an education and not go into debt. That's not a color. That's just right.
Thank you, Derrick. Stephen Foster.
Yeah, I'd like to echo the sentiments with regard to Dr. E.E. Rodgers quickly. He was easily, in my opinion, as successful as anybody I have ever even heard of personally. He's always been somebody I kind of associated in the same realm as my father. There was a lot of similarities between them. They're 3 years apart, and they had an affinity for each other without being close friends. And as I have the same kind of affinity I have for Dr. Rodgers' son Sherman. He's 3 years older than I am. I looked up to him as a freshman here at Oakwood when he was a senior, and have looked up to him ever since. And so there's some familial relationship I feel with the Rodgers family, and my condolences. I would like to just criticize the party that I vote for in this season. This has been, I've never seen a more concentrated and profound amount of political stupidity in all of my years. I mean, they this they can't even blame on Republicans. They can't even blame on Trump. I mean, this is completely self-inflicted, and it's just, it's profound. I'm thoroughly convinced, inalterably convinced that the Democrats are just stupid and the Republicans are just evil. So, there's a line in Godfather 3 where Joey Zaza said, "You must choose between us."
I'm chuckling even more because I just watched the Godfather trilogy last night. It's on Showtime this month, and so I was consumed. In fact, I tweeted. I said, I've seen the Godfather 1,000 times. It's on again. I'm watching it, and then Godfather 2 came on. I did a second tweet saying, I've seen Godfather 2 1,000 times. I'm watching it again.
Yeah, and there's a line in that movie that is apropos for every situation in life, and that you must choose between us is where we are now.
Yeah, wow.
Unbelievable.
Wow. I tell you, Stephen, my goodness, I completely agree with what you're saying. And it is frustrating. It is exasperating. It's almost like, it's like the blueprint is sitting right in front of you, but you're doing everything to avoid following the blueprint. It's like the evidence of what should be done or could be done is sitting right there in front of you, but you're kind of ignoring it, or you're kind of not really engaging it the way you need to be. And it is absolutely confounding. Even the finger pointing that came out of Tuesday looked foolish because, like you said, it was a self-inflicted wound. I mean, don't blame somebody else. Look at yourself, you know? And so it's very, very troubling and very disturbing and portends for some things as we move down the highway here. We're moving into 2022. The next 6 months are going to be quite interesting to see where we go in this process. And of course, shortly after that, we'll have announcements for President of the United States in 2024. That's going to be an interesting journey as well. And we'll see exactly what happens. David Person.
Well, I want to say it's always great to be with the fellas, and it was great to hang with Derrick this afternoon as well. Good to see you, Derrick. And again, congratulations on the victory in New Jersey. I want to quickly pay tribute to my Chicago homeboy, Lewis Jones, who lost his wife, Ann Jones, and she was buried yesterday. I'm sorry, not yesterday, Friday. And, she was a wonderful woman, sweet person. Lewis, longtime Oakwood employee. Both of them were members of the First SDA Church here in Huntsville. Just a great couple, great family. Condolences to Lewis, to his daughters, Jessica and Nadine, and the rest of their extended family as they walk with God through this loss.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for a very vibrant conversation. We appreciate everything again. Preston Foster, thank you for joining me today. Dr. Keith Burton, thank you for joining me today.
Shukran and assalamu alaikum, my friend.
Derrick Green, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Kenny.
And Stephen Foster, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. It's always great to have David in the studio. As you guys can kind of see, there's a little something going on. He's over there. I'm right here. And of course, every first and third Sunday of the month, it's Second Chance and an opportunity for us to talk with the fellas on the What's Going On segment. I'm going to come back in just a moment, and I'm going to let you guys know what's going on next week. And I'll do that in just a minute. Always a pleasure to talk with my brothers on the What's Going On Social and Political Roundtable every first and third Sunday of the month on the Second Chance radio broadcast. As always, I'm Kenny Anderson, host and producer of the show. And on next Sunday, we'll have a chance to talk with my friends from United Way. We'll talk with my friends from Bancorp South, and we'll introduce you to Positivity Plus, which is a virtual-based platform that provides telehealth for those who are needing mental health services. We'll have that and much more next Sunday. In the meantime, I hope you have a great rest of the week. Remember, as always, knowledge is better than riches. Have a great afternoon, and we'll talk again soon. Good day.
Chance. We hope that the information that was shared has been a blessing to you and that your life will be